One of my colleagues talked, Director Patel, about you traveling too much. Is it important that you go out there and travel and talk to our line agents and try to maintain morale?
That's
In Washington, D.C., inside a Senate hearing room where every polite thank you is really a knife wrapped in velvet, Senator Kennedy turned a routine oversight exchange into something much darker. A public audit of power, fear, cartels, intelligence, surveillance, and the people who are supposed to keep Americans alive. On one side sat Director Kash Patel, defending his travel by saying he had taken fewer personal holiday trips and fewer days off than his two prior predecessors combined, while insisting that meeting line agents and protecting morale was one of the most important parts of the job.
That's one of the most important parts of the job, and if I can, when it comes to travel, I've actually traveled 1/3 less for personal holidays than my prior two predecessors combined, and I've taken half as many days off as my prior predecessors combined.
On the other side sat Director Cole, pressed into explaining why Mexico had just produced 98 defendants brought back in 1 year, roughly triple the year before, while cartel violence, corruption, kidnapping, beheadings, and narcotics money kept poisoning both Mexican institutions and American families. And then, just when the room seemed locked on cartel power, Kennedy shifted the blade to Section 702, asking why intelligence officials should not need warrants when American citizens' records are queried.
We shouldn't require warrants under Section 702 when our intelligence people access the records of American citizens.
I think you're referring to the query process of U.S. persons under 702, Senator.
Yes, sir.
Because under Section 702 as it stands, the collection from 702 is already lawfully collected under federal statute of overseas individuals targeted by the intelligence communities. And just to clarify, 702 is run separately by the FBI, the NSA, the CIA. They have their own separate 702 programs. So for us, in order to have the ability to defend the homeland appropriately, all we are doing when we run a query is we're asking that this selector popped.
That is not a normal hearing. That is a live stress test of whether the government can fight monsters without quietly becoming too comfortable with extraordinary power. The first issue Kennedy raised looked almost small, Patel's travel. But it was not small at all, because Washington loves to mock field leadership while demanding field results from people it never bothers to meet. Kennedy's question was simple. Is it important for the FBI director to go out and speak with line agents to keep morale alive? To show the people doing dangerous work that leadership is not just hiding behind marble walls and committee talking points? Patel answered directly, yes, and he added the receipt, saying he had traveled 1/3 less for personal holidays than his prior two predecessors combined and taken half as many days off. That answer mattered because it reframed the accusation from too much travel into something more inconvenient. Maybe the real complaint was not travel, but visibility, presence, and a director refusing to behave like a decorative nameplate in Washington. Then Kennedy opened the real door: Mexico, cartels, and political power tied to poison crossing the border.
I love the people of Mexico. They're just wonderful people. They're our neighbors. We buy a lot of their goods and they buy a lot of our goods. But help me understand why so many of the political leaders in Mexico cooperate so fully, tend to have very close ties with the drug cartels. Is it money? Is it power? Is it fear? And what do we do about it?
But generally speaking, we've been able to retrieve 98 defendants from Mexico in the last year, which is, I think, triple the year before. So they're cooperating in ways that they haven't done before in the past. But I do see your point, and I agree that largely it's fear, Senator. These cartels have so much power, and you've seen them go down there and kidnap people, behead people, burn people. And I think it's a combination of the fear and a little bit of the corruption because of the influence they have with the amount of money they make from the narco-trafficking trade, which is why we're prioritizing bringing it down.
He did not pretend the people of Mexico were the enemy. He made the distinction clearly, calling them neighbors, trading partners, and wonderful people. But he also asked the question Washington often buries under diplomatic perfume. Why do so many political leaders in Mexico seem so close to cartel power? Is it money, power, fear, or all three packed into the same bloody machine? That is where this hearing stopped being polite and started sounding like evidence. Director Cole's answer did not come wrapped in bureaucratic perfume, and that is why it landed. He said, generally, the United States had been able to retrieve 98 defendants from Mexico in the last year, roughly triple the year before, and that Mexico was cooperating in ways it had not cooperated before. That is the first receipt on the table, and it matters because numbers cut through speeches faster than slogans ever will. 98 defendants is not a press release number. It is a signal that somebody finally decided the old game of polite statements and border theater was not enough. And when Director Cole said the cartel problem was largely driven by fear, he was not describing an abstract policy challenge. He was describing a criminal empire with enough money to buy silence and enough cruelty to punish anyone who refuses to sell it. This is where the moral weight of the hearing starts to get heavy. Cole described cartels that kidnap people, behead people, burn people, and use that violence as a governing language. That is not just crime. That is political power, wearing a butcher's apron. A normal gang threatens a neighborhood, but a cartel with enough money, weapons, and government access can bend police, judges, border systems, and entire public offices into service of the drug trade. And the ugly truth Kennedy forced into the room was this. When narcotics come across the border and destroy American families, the damage does not begin at the final street corner. It begins much earlier, inside networks where corrupt protection, fear, and political convenience let the poison move.
Yes, sir.
Regarding the arrest of Garcia Luna, who was in charge of the federal police in Mexico. And after a career special agent, I had the opportunity to work in Colombia, Afghanistan, and end my career in Mexico. There's no doubt that the narco traffickers and high-ranking government officials in Mexico have been in bed for years. We're paying attention to it. We have a president who fully supports America first, Americans first. They are just as much responsible for the death and destruction of record amounts of Americans by cooperating, by conspiring, by helping, producing this poison to come across the border and come into our country. And Senator, I can assure you, this is just the start of about what's to come.
Then Director Cole went further by pointing back to Garcia Luna, the former head of Mexico's federal police, a man whose name does not enter this discussion by accident. Cole reminded the room that he had testified about Garcia Luna during his confirmation hearing, and then he said what many officials spend their whole careers trying to say without actually saying. Narcotic traffickers and high-ranking government officials in Mexico have been in bed for years. That line is not subtle, and it should not be subtle, because subtle language is exactly how institutions hide rot until the public forgets what rot smells like. When a top law enforcement figure is connected to cartel corruption, the scandal is not only that one man betrayed his badge. The scandal is that criminal power got close enough to the badge to use it as cover. And here's the part that should bother every serious viewer. This hearing was not only about what Mexico did wrong, and it was not only about what cartels did violently. It was about what previous governments were willing to tolerate, excuse, misread, or politely avoid saying out loud. Kennedy made that point when he referenced the old hugs, not bullets approach toward cartels, and he was not using it as a cute political jab. He was making a prosecutorial argument. When the state treats cartel power like a social discomfort instead of a violent command structure, the cartel does not become softer. The cartel becomes bolder. Because criminals who behead people do not interpret restraint as compassion. They interpret it as room to expand. That is the internal contradiction Kennedy exposed. You cannot say you love the people of Mexico, respect them as neighbors, trade with them, and then ignore the cartel networks that terrorize those same people and poison Americans across the border. Real respect for Mexico means telling the truth about the leaders who cooperate with cartel power, whether out of fear, greed, power, or survival. Real respect for American victims means refusing to pretend that fentanyl, narcotics trafficking, and cartel corruption are just unfortunate background noise in a complex diplomatic relationship. And real law enforcement means understanding that a governor accused of working with cartels, while still innocent until proven guilty, represents something much bigger than one indictment. It represents the possibility that public office itself can become a delivery system for organized destruction. This is the moral scene of the hearing. Not the polished microphones, not the titles, not the senators, not the directors, not the careful, "Thank you, Mr. Chairman" language. The real scene is a parent standing over a dead child, a community watching addiction spread like smoke under a locked door, a border agent trying to stop a river with a flashlight, and a Mexican citizen living under the shadow of men who can murder in daylight and still expect political protection at night. That is why Cole's line, "This is just the start of what's to come in Mexico," matters. Because once a government admits cartel power has been protected by fear and corruption, the next question is brutal. Are officials finally going to dismantle it, or are they just going to rename the failure and call it strategy? Then Kennedy made the turn that changed the hearing from cartel violence to constitutional pressure. After walking through Mexico, narcotics, fear, corruption, and the death trail left by cartel power, he looked at Director Kash Patel and asked a question that sounded simple but carried the weight of the Fourth Amendment behind it. Why should the government not be required to get warrants under Section 702 when intelligence people access records tied to American citizens? That is the kind of question Washington likes to dress up in technical language, because technical language makes dangerous power sound clean. But strip away the acronyms, and the issue is not hard to understand. When the government touches information connected to Americans, who exactly is watching the watchers? And if the answer is trust the process, then the next question has to be, which process, written by whom, checked by whom, and punished by whom when it fails? Patel answered by narrowing the issue. He said Kennedy was referring to the query process involving U.S. persons under Section 702, not the original overseas collection itself. That distinction matters because Patel's argument was that the information under Section 702 is already lawfully collected from overseas targets under federal statute, and that agencies like the FBI, NSA, and CIA operate their own separate 702 programs. In other words, Patel was saying, the government is not starting from zero, breaking into an American's life with no legal basis. It is working from information already collected overseas, then checking whether a selector connects to terrorism, narcotics trafficking, or another national security threat. That is his legal frame, and to be fair, it has logic. But logic is not the same thing as comfort. Patel then gave the practical argument. The FBI cannot walk into a courtroom and get probable cause based only on a selector that popped inside lawfully collected foreign intelligence. According to him, the government would have almost nothing it could fully explain to a judge at that early stage. They might say, in effect, "Judge, we have this selector. It connects to foreign intelligence, but we cannot tell you much more yet." And the judge would say, "There is no probable cause." So Patel's position was that the query system exists because it allows investigators to find out whether the selector actually connects to terrorism, narcotics trafficking, or other threats before there is enough information for a traditional warrant. That answer is important because it exposes the central dilemma of modern intelligence. The government says it needs speed before the bomb goes off, before the cartel transfer completes, before the foreign target disappears, before the network changes phones and names and routes. Citizens say speed is not a blank check, secrecy is not accountability, and lawfully collected does not magically erase the risk of abuse when American information gets searched inside a massive intelligence system. Both ideas can exist in the same room, but one of them always gets louder when fear enters the room. And fear, as this hearing already showed with the cartels, is a powerful political instrument. Here is the contradiction that should not be ignored. Kennedy and the directors had just spent several minutes describing cartel power as dangerous because it hides behind institutions, corrupts authority, and uses fear to bypass normal rules. Then, almost immediately, the hearing moved to a surveillance framework where government agencies asked the public to accept exceptional access, because the threat is too urgent for ordinary legal procedure. That does not make Patel wrong automatically, but it does make the question unavoidable. When the state says, "We need this power to protect you," serious citizens must answer, "Then show us the guardrails strong enough to protect us from that power too." Because a tool built for terrorists and traffickers can still become dangerous if the standard for using it gets loose, quiet, or politically convenient. And that is where this hearing becomes bigger than Patel, bigger than Kennedy, and bigger than one committee room. The same government that must chase cartel networks across borders must also prove it can respect the constitutional line at home. The same agencies that say they need agility must also accept discipline. The same officials who demand trust must earn it with oversight, documentation, accountability, and consequences when power is misused. Because national security without civil liberty becomes arrogance, but civil liberty without national security becomes an open door for people who do not care how many families they destroy. So the real lesson from this hearing is not that Senator Kennedy asked a few sharp questions or that Director Kash Patel and Director Cole gave a few clean answers. The real lesson is that government power always arrives wearing a noble costume. It says it is protecting agents, protecting borders, protecting families, protecting intelligence sources, protecting national security. And sometimes that is true. But the moment citizens stop asking hard questions, that same power can start protecting itself. That is why the cartel discussion and the Section 702 discussion belong in the same hearing, even though they look like separate issues. Cartels are what happens when criminal power becomes rich enough, violent enough, and politically connected enough to bend public institutions. Surveillance abuse is what can happen when state power becomes secret enough, technical enough, and protected enough from ordinary public challenge. One is violence from the outside pushing in. The other is authority from the inside stretching outward. Both require the same answer: pressure, oversight, receipts, and consequences. My view is simple. America cannot fight cartel poison with soft slogans, diplomatic fog, and moral cowardice. When officials, governors, police chiefs, or political actors cooperate with narcotics networks, they are not just making a bad policy choice, they are helping deliver death across borders. And America also cannot defend freedom by telling citizens to stop worrying because the government's intentions are good. Good intentions are not a warrant. Good intentions are not oversight. Good intentions are not a substitute for rules that still work when the people in power are no longer the people you personally trust. That is the hard balance Kennedy forced into the room. Protect the country, yes. Crush cartel networks, yes. Support agents on the ground, yes. But never let the fight against monsters become an excuse to build machinery that ordinary Americans are not allowed to question. Because at the end of the day, the test of a serious government is not whether it can sound tough in a hearing room. The test is whether it can defend the innocent, punish the corrupt, restrain itself, and still tell the truth when the truth makes powerful people uncomfortable. And the question left hanging over that room is this: if the law cannot reach cartel-connected power abroad and cannot restrain secret power at home, then who exactly is the law still strong enough to control? If you think this hearing exposed something bigger than politics, hit like, drop your thoughts in the comments, share this video, and subscribe for more breakdowns where the evidence does the talking.